Hi, welcome to our Thursday live. Cuida does lives 3 days a week, and Monday is everything about raising children with disabilities. Thursday is discussions regarding adults with disabilities, and Friday is everything about senior care. And we picked those specific topics and subject matters because those are the people that Cuida serves. So Cuida is an application that you download to your smartphone, and you are matched with clients in their home. And the clients in their home need caregivers to help them with their activities of daily living. So we want to provide resources and education to those that are needing care, our users and followers, to help them along the caregiving journey, because caregiving can be incredibly hard. So today we are actually going to be talking to Danielle Sullivan, and she is the podcaster that really advocates and supports those that are neurodivergent. And today we're going to be talking about what it's like to be in a neurodivergent marriage or relationship, which is pretty interesting. And I'm sure she has some pearls of wisdom to share with us. So I'm going to let Danielle in. And she should be joining any second. There you are.
I'm trying to get my phone. Hello, everyone. Ignore my moving parts here. How are you, Gina?
Oh, I'm doing good. A little tired today. I didn't do much yesterday, so I had like double the work today. And we have this huge dumpster outside our house that I want to take advantage of. So I'm cleaning out the garage. And I'm just like, it's endless, like 20 years of stuff. And I'm just like, dump it. I don't care if it's in the package, just dump it.
Yeah. It's really good to get that stuff out of there, get a fresh start. Yeah,
it's like a cleansing. I feel like less anxiety, emotionally lighter, but physically exhausted.
It's a lot. It can be a lot.
Yeah, it is. And it's Veterans Day. So, we kind of had a little bit of time to, do some self-care, because I think of that as self-care.
Yes.
Taking care of my space and keeping organized. And that's essential to my ability to function. So today we're going to talk about some tips about having to be successful in a marriage that there's a mixed neurotype partnership. And so can you tell us just a little bit about, like, what does that mean, neurotype partnership?
Sure. Yeah. So a neurotype is just kind of a fancy word for what kind of brain you have. And there are many, many options. Some of the most common ones would be neurotypical, which is your average person, isn't what we call. And then there are neurodivergent people, which include folks with autism, with ADHD, with OCD, with depression, anxiety, with any host of kind of not average issues. And so we have different neurotypes. So I have an autistic neurotype. My partner has an ADHD neurotype. A lot of folks end up being partnered with or marrying people who are not the same brain as you, and it can require some different adaptations and different approaches to make it work successfully. So, yeah.
So let me ask you, the saying that opposites attract. Do people that are on the autism spectrum tend to be attracted to ADHD people?
I don't know that there's been any research on that. I will say that most autistics are also ADHD. Just I think it's something like 50 to 80% of autistic people are have a co-occurring ADHD diagnosis. So a lot of us are both. But then I also think there is um, I'm thinking there's such variation in
Mm-hmm.
both autistic people and ADHD people that I think it really depends. But people can, we have some really, I think people often think of us in terms of what we're not good at or our deficits, but we have some really positive attributes. Like a lot of ADHDers are really outgoing, kind of take life by the horns kind of people. They don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily plan ahead, but they're very willing to jump in and just make stuff happen. And
Yeah.
that's a great trait for a part, for certain kinds of folks to have in a partner, whether you're autistic or not, neurodivergent or not, neurotypical or not. So yeah, I think there are some really good traits that balance out lots of different kinds of people.
Right, right. Because I always kind of wondered, they seem to be on the
Yeah,
opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
sometimes. Yeah.
And but depending on, the type that you have, I could see what you're saying about that.
Yeah. A lot of ADHDers are also highly introverted and don't necessarily want to be quite as outgoing. People with ADHD and autism sometimes are we're interesting because we like our routines and we like our plans. And then once in a blue moon, we'll just be like, I want to go do something ridiculous today. It comes out of nowhere. So it can be, yeah, there's just a lot of variety, I think.
So, shall we just talk about, I mean, I'm sure that there's so many different types of neurotypes that can be matched.
Yeah.
So what would you like to focus on today?
Sure. Well, I just thought we could talk about, because there's such a variety of in terms of individuals. I thought we could talk about some sort of general tips or guidelines, I guess, for if you have a partner who's a different neurotype than you, how to kind of work together to solve problems or create a life together that's a positive, uplifting, supportive one for both of you. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions too that anybody has or that you have.
So how do you do that?
Yeah.
Give us some tips, because you could probably save a lot of marriages today.
Well, maybe. So my first tip is that I think that especially so I'll just back up a little bit and say that both my partner and I were late identified, which means when we came into this marriage together, both of us thought we were neurotypical people. Both of us thought we were just sort of average Joes off the street. And he was identified as ADHD when he was in his early 40s, late 30s, and I was identified as autistic right after I had my first child when I was about 32. So that's a long span of life to not be identified as neurodivergent. So I think that my first tip is always, best you can, learn about your person's whatever it is. So if you are wanting to date a partner with ADHD, wanting to date a partner with autism, or if you're an autistic person and you want to date a neurotypical person, try to learn about um, some of the things, some of the co-occurrences, some of the traits that come along with that neurotype. And there's so many resources nowadays. There are, ADHD autistic YouTubers. If you like blogs, you can read books, obviously, from the library. There's tons of coaches that specialize in those kinds of relationships, or therapists or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And also talk to your person about their specific point of view and what they perceive as kind of going on with them. Because again, there's huge variety in the spectrum. And so just because you've read one book on ADHD doesn't mean you know the specific ADHD in front of you. So being really open to their perspectives and open to their ideas. And if you're a neurotypical person coming into a partnership with an autistic or an ADHD or neurodivergent person, to recognize that they are probably doing a lot of work to reach out to you and that you should do it back. Because I think there is a tendency among neurotypical people to just be used to everybody else being like them and to not recognize how much work their partner may be doing just to communicate or just to kind of work with them. And so being able to acknowledge that and be aware of what they're doing can be really helpful and kind of bridge communication gaps, bring everybody closer together and that kind of thing. So that's my number one, is just kind of do your background research.
Well, I'm really hoping that in 20, 30 years time, that
Mm-hmm.
every dating app will say, like, what is your neurotype?
that be so nice? And I've seen people just put nowadays, in their text blurb, neurodivergent or autistic or ADHD or whatever it is, because first of all, if someoe's gonna I don't know which direction you swipe. I'm so out of the loop. But if you're gonna say no to that person, then say no, I don't want to date an ADHD, or better to just not even. And then second, it can help you find somebody who's like you. If you're somebody who's autistic and wants to date another autistic person, for example, it's kind of great to just put that out there and be like, this is who I am, and it raises neurotypical awareness that we exist too, which, you don't have to out yourself to everybody if you're not comfortable with that. Certainly there are spaces where it's not a good idea to out yourself as a neurodivergent person, but a lot of times it's really great for me to go on those apps and be like, oh, there's another ADHD, or oh, there's another one, So it's really good.
Well, I think the statistics are a lot higher than what we see. And, when I started to learn about what it means to be neurodivergent, I'll be honest with you, I was like, I don't even know anyone neurotypical.
Yeah. And that can be, and a lot of us sort of tend to gather, my partner and I were just talking about this yesterday, that, even though I wasn't identified until pretty late, all of my best friends have since been identified as either autistic or ADHD or OCD or some kind of neurodivergence. Yeah. So I think a lot of us tend to sort of, not on purpose, but just accidentally kind of pull in people who are like us.
Yeah, you
right?
attract who you are. So.
Attract who you are, yeah. And so you end up having a lot of folks not just with similar interests, but similar worldviews, right? Similar perceptions of what's going on. And that can be really fun. So yeah, it's funny that theoretically the world is made up of mostly neurotypical people, because I don't know where they all are some days.
Yeah, I don't know where they are either. Well, it's interesting because, if I knew what I know now, I think I would have had less fighting in my relationships.
Yeah.
Because I would have really just saw that person as having, you just have a different brain. And that their perspective was just different from mine. And I would need to learn how to understand that perspective instead of getting defensive and start fighting. And, it's like this dynamic that becomes hostile, to be honest.
It can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things are unfortunately really common in some partnerships, especially like you can tell from just what I'm talking about. My specialty is really in ADHD, autistic folks. So although I know a lot about other neurodivergent brains, when it comes to kind of relationships, that's where I focus. And a lot of autistic ADHD folks, we have trouble with executive function, which means organizing, planning, the stuff of running a household together, having children together. A lot of couples do really well and then have children and just start to fall apart. And it's because the coping mechanisms they had for two individuals just cease to work when you have a baby or you have any kind of sleep deprivation. You have to organize childcare. There's just a lot more to do. You have to organize doctor's appointments. And have kind of executive dysfunction issue on either partner or both. With me and my partner, it's both. And we really started to fall apart after that first baby. And there were multiple reasons, but one of them was definitely that we had been getting along okay enough with our function that we thought we were kind of normal. And then the baby came and we had to organize all this other stuff. We just started to kind of fall to pieces. We couldn't keep on top of it all, right? And that's not a failing in our relationship or a lack of commitment to one another or our family, but much more just we didn't have the skills to address that, right? And that happens with a lot of neurotypical couples. Another thing is a lot of, again, ADHD, autistic people process their emotions differently. We can be highly reactive to negative emotion. We can be highly empathetic to the point of, and we can have what's called rejection dysphoria sensitivity. Is that right? Or I think it's got all those words in it. It's rejection dysphoria, yeah. And what it is you, a partner, somebody in your life says no or doesn't pay enough attention to you, or you feel rejected. And it might not be that the partner meant to reject you, but your perception is that you've been rejected. And instead of being like, oh, well, that kind of sucks, but I'll get over it and I'll be fine, you have this huge emotional reaction that then you maybe aren't sharing with your partner. And so your partner thinks everything is fine, and you're over here having kind of an emotional break.
So is that the ADHD or is that the one?
It can be, it's more common in ADHD, but it happens with autistic folks too. And I believe it can happen, like some neurotypical folks experience this, but it's much, much more common in neurodivergent people. So that is all to say that the neurotype, the way your brain is actually working, can have a huge impact on how you're processing your emotions. And emotions are the basis of any relationship, right? So if you're not processing emotions the same way as your partner, but neither of you realize that, then you can kind of be headed towards these big blowups without realizing it or knowing it ahead of time. So it seems like it comes out of left field. But
so the emotional dysregulation.
It's huge, yeah.
Yeah. So
huge.
Would you say, well, it really depends, because if someone is, autistic with ADHD, they would have components of both.
They could, yeah.
But if you're just ADHD and you're just autistic, I would think that would be more opposite of each other.
It can be. It really, again, depends on the individual, but like, to be really almost stereotypical with you, one of the things my partner and I ran into is I definitely do the stereotypical autistic thing where I like my routine and I like low energy day and I'm low resource and you mess up my plan, I might just completely fall over and melt down and not be able to handle it. And when I was underslept and nursing 6 times a night and had 2 kids under 2 and all that,
yeah,
like,
forget it.
I was definitely going to fall over. Like, there was no chance I would recuperate from that.
Yeah.
My partner is that kind of stereotypical ADHD where he does tend to just kind of not really have a plan and just kind of be winging it. And it usually works out well for him. But again, when we had our first child, I started, not sleeping and all that. We were having all the executive function issues I just mentioned. And then also I became very rigid because I was so low resource all the time from everything. Yeah. I just couldn't handle any change and I just couldn't do it. Whereas my partner, his kind of coping mechanism was to go completely the other direction. And because we couldn't plan with a baby, because we didn't know when baby was waking up or baby wanted to eat or baby wanted to do anything, he was just like, whatever, I'll deal with it when it comes up. And to me, in my rigid sort of black-white thinking mindset at that time, it felt like he was not taking everything seriously because this baby is important. Why wouldn't you plan every little thing? Like, you have to make sure the baby will be okay, which is like a really not helpful, not supportive way to think about things. But I had no malleability in that mind space. I was just completely stuck. And then he would go the other way and he, was trying to, again, respond to what he thought the baby needed and was like, Danielle, why are you being so rigid? Why are you, trying to micromanage every little thing?
Why are you being a control freak?
Exactly. Yeah. Because, and that can be an issue, with any person, regardless of your brain. But when you get anxious, a lot of us lean towards controlling in whatever way we tend to cope that way. And so that's an example where, like, my autistic brain and his ADHD brain were going in, we both wanted the same thing. We were trying to help the baby, help our family, but we went completely different directions. We misunderstood each other kind of dramatically, terribly, and caused a lot of ongoing issues at the time because we just couldn't see that we were both trying to go towards the same goal. We were both working on the same thing.
So what do you do in those moments where, I see that great compromise from both sides are needed. And hopefully the relationships of the future will have a little bit more knowledge, about these differences. Maybe the divorce rate will even go down. But, but in those moments, I would imagine you would have to consciously say, okay, he has a different brain,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of shift your thinking. What do
Yeah.
you do in those moments?
The thing that he and I really settled on ourselves was to just remember that we are each doing the best we can, which sounds
Mm,
really cliché when you say it, but a lot of what was happening was that I felt like at the time, in my very, again, rigid kind of mindset, I was feeling like he wasn't taking it seriously, and he was feeling like I was taking it way too seriously. And we were both trying our best, but neither one believed that the other one was, if that makes sense. And so if you
mm,
take as given that your partner is doing the best with what they have, then it becomes an issue not of their commitment, right, to you or their family, but much more of a skills gap. Like there is something missing between what I need and what he needs. So what is that missing piece? And it's not his fault or my fault, but it's
mm,
we
mhm,
don't have the emotional regulation skills. We don't have the mindfulness skills. We need a babysitter. Like whatever whatever that piece is, it becomes
mhm,
much more about building that bridge and finding the right pieces
mhm,
as opposed to
mhm,
placing blame and feeling like,
mhm.
oh, I just have to do it myself, or he's never going to take this seriously, or whatever your story is about what's going on. Does that make
We
sense?
actually have a question from HP Nick,
Sure.
and he was asking, what advice do you have? He's a single dad. What
Mm-hmm.
advice can you give him? His 11-year-old son has the gift of ADHD.
Yeah.
And what would you advise him as a dad on how to raise a child with
Mm-hmm.
ADHD?
Hello. I have, if you ever want to email me, I'll just say I'm happy to like go in spades. But without knowing kind of specifically what the concern is, I would just say that it's always good to let your kiddo know that having ADHD is a totally normal part of human diversity. And
Mm-hmm.
it is a gift, like you said. So I'm glad to hear you say that. And obviously, any kind of brain has its challenges, but we work through it together and really focusing on skill building and emotional regulation and resilience, right? So we make a mistake, it's okay, we come back from it. We have our big feelings, but feelings are not fact, and we still have to kind of recede into the future.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Learning how to identify emotions and being able to um, display them appropriately for the setting is a really great thing to work on just by naming them at home.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this before. If you want to watch past, I think they're on this channel, right, Gina?
Mm-hmm.
Watch
Yeah.
past videos. We've talked about emotional regulation for ADHDers, so that might be a good resource for you. Um, and just helping him remember that when he bumps into challenges, that he's not alone in that, that there are
Mm-hmm.
millions and millions of other people in this world with brains just like his. And if
Mm-hmm.
you can find some of them for social kind of opportunities, I always recommend whether the kiddo is autistic, ADHD, whatever it is, find them other peers and friends, even if they're a little older or younger, that have that kind of same neurotype. Because there's nothing like being the only ADHDer in a sea of neurotypical people at
Mm-hmm.
school, and sometimes being singled out for not being able to sit still or being very loud, whatever it is. If
Mm-hmm.
you're with other people like you, then you begin to see that this is really a normal thing, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there are I'm part of the world. I exist in this continuum of human diversity. And so
Mm-hmm.
um, just just
Mm-hmm.
trying to find them friends and other
Mm-hmm.
peers that have those same kinds of things. Oh, sorry, is what I would recommend. So I hope that helps.
Mm-hmm.
Let me know if you have follow up.
You know, it's really hard
Mm-hmm.
because it takes a lot of patience. Any parent that has parented a child with ADHD or any other kind of challenge, it's really hard. It takes, I mean, like, no matter how much I recognize or I remember in the moments, it's really easy to get frustrated.
Yeah.
And they get frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I always have to remember that truly the intention is not to disobey. The
Oh,
intention, right? The intention is to do good, but they truly have a different brain.
yes,
And the executive function piece, just know it's a lifelong journey.
it is. And it really is about skill building. And I will
Yeah.
also just say that a lot of schools depending on where your child is placed and kind of just who they're learning from, um, expect higher level executive functioning skills at school than the child is really capable of at their level of growth, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. So
Mhm.
sometimes if just because the neurotypical students can do it and your ADHD can't, doesn't actually mean that they're not ever going to be able to. It just means that they just haven't
Mhm.
gotten and that's super normal, and they might just need some more help at home. And like you said, any kind of defiance
Mhm.
behavior, any kind of pushback,
Mhm.
that's really not on purpose. It's just anxiety. It's just that struggle
Mhm.
of knowing something is different about you and trying to, as a child, process
Mhm.
that. It can come out in all sorts of
Mhm.
kind of difficult ways for the parent, but the kid is
Yeah.
doing it their best, always, always, always. Mm-hmm.
And, really starting young, early
Mm-hmm.
intervention is key. And
Yes.
because the executive function early on is so challenging, the external organization of their environment is vital.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Um, so, like for instance, what we do is we have a routine, daily routine,
Mm-hmm.
morning routine, night routine.
Get
And
as much out of your head and out of their head and onto
yes,
like a physical piece of paper or something and hang it up everywhere as you can
yes,
because it will save you. Yeah.
yeah.
Reduce clutter
And
so see where their stuff is. Like, yeah.
yeah. And it brings down the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And so the other day I had asked, oh, can you go upstairs and get some rags?
Mm-hmm.
And usually by the time he goes upstairs, he forgot why he went upstairs.
Yeah.
But this time he brought down the rags.
Congratulations.
And
That's a big
I'm telling
step
you, we
forward.
all just stood there and we just
You
clapped. We were
did
just so
it.
excited.
Yeah. And you have to celebrate those little wins with them because they want to do well. And so if you can like reinforce that positively and say you did it, like you did it, and even if you can't do
Yeah,
it next time, we know you can do it eventually, right? So
right.
just really celebrating those wins anytime you see them.
Because
And
you're training the brain.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah. You're actively training the brain when you provide that external organization, and then it becomes just like habit to them. Like they don't even have to think about it,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
that's what we want because they have so much else in their head. They do not need to be remembering like eight
Yeah.
step routines, and a lot of times we just can't. Like it's not like we don't want to. It's we just our brains just don't work like yours. We just can't do it.
So
So
I have to tell you this really funny story. And this is my little ADHD coming out. I know it is, but I have to tell you. So I went away with my son who also has ADHD, and we
yeah.
were sitting in the hotel. We were just about to leave, and then the OCD comes out, and you want to make sure you didn't forget anything.
Uh,
Well, sure enough, every time we wanted to leave the hotel, we forgot something.
yeah. How many times
So
did you have to go back? Was
So,
it?
so 5 times we were
Yeah.
ready, and all 5 times we forgot something.
That's good.
So
You should.
finally, he's like, "Ma, what is wrong with your brain?" And I'm like, "Okay, listen. Do you have your iPad?" He goes, "Yes." I said, "And I have my purse. Everything else is replaceable. Let's go."
Yeah. You do really learn to prioritize when you have that kind of if at some point you just have to
Yeah,
be like, this is just the way it is. We're just gonna keep
yeah,
moving. So
yeah.
yeah.
It
Yeah.
it was like hilarious, and
Yeah.
we had the best time, and we
Mhm.
kind of laughed at ourselves. I mean, like, and then we said, well, we're glad Dad's not with us because he doesn't have our brain. He has an
Yeah.
opposite brain.
Yeah. And I like you were asking about opposites before, and I think some of us do attract the opposite brain because
Mm-hmm.
you want to combine your skills. And so if your partner is really good at organizing and planning, but not so great at
Mm-hmm.
other things, like you can fill in gaps for each other, and sometimes that can be really nice.
Well, and I
Yeah.
think, like we've talked about this before, is that a lot of people don't want to come out and say, oh, I have this type of brain. Like there's
Mhm.
like this shame and embarrassment. And, but I really embrace my ADHD like a badge of honor,
You should.
because it has really helped me do things that, um, I don't think I normally would do. Like, I can go up and talk to anybody and have a total conversation for hours and feel rejuvenated afterwards.
That is a
And,
talent.
you
I did not.
know, I can go and raise, I was at this fundraiser and we're just like, okay, let's just go do it. Like when you were talking about, you don't plan, you just do.
You just go
And
for it. It's
yeah,
amazing. Love it.
yeah, you just like make things happen. You don't even think about it. You just go out there. So really, HP Nick, focus on his strengths. This is, some of the best CEOs are ADHD. Some of the best CEOs didn't even complete high school. Now, I'm not advocating for that, or they didn't even complete college, but they have these talents that if you gear him the right way and take away the shame, the only issue with any of these kind of disabilities is the unnecessary shame that we put onto it. That's the problem.
Yeah. And a lot of it is just, again, if you're in a neurotypical population all the time, like if you're at work with neurotypical people, you're at school with neurotypical people, you're the only ADHDer then you can't see how normal it is. And so you kind of get all these messages from society of how you should sit still and you should do this a certain way. And that's really not the way the real world works. But when you're a kid and you're in school every day, you just see this very sort of highly ritualized, rigid environment as being the world. Like, so if you could at home just reinforce, like Gina just said, just reinforce that he has amazing strengths and he's going to do great things, and everybody makes mistakes and nobody's perfect. But when you get out into the real world, none of that is going to matter. Like, you're going to be with real people, real people make mistakes. People are imperfect. Collaboration, working together, focusing on strengths, like Gina said, all of that is just going to go so far. And getting rid of the shame, saying, you know what, your brain might not be able to do that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Like, we should still try. And maybe there are supports we can give you or different ways of organizing that will help you do this. But if it's not going to happen, that's okay. Let's work on this other thing, Everybody is this mix of strengths and weaknesses, and that's normal. So
I think, at our age, a lot of people did not get early intervention, right? Like we have these late diagnoses, and but in the work environment and in raising families and relationships, we've had some interventions, life interventions, I call it, right? But that early intervention piece, I'm thinking, like I said before, 20, 30 years down the road, we're going to have neurodivergent people that have better tools, coping skills, and some of these characteristics that kind of can dominate are not so dominant.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so it's not such a challenge.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of my friends, I have to tell them, I'm like, remember, he is a undiagnosed child that did not have any intervention.
Yeah. And my youngest is kind of like that. I obviously didn't get my partner didn't get intervention, and we still managed to do pretty awesome things. So imagine what these kids who are getting services now will be able to do with that much more, ahead. So if you have access to like occupational therapy, if you have access to just like, even just a lot of tutors now offer executive functioning support, and there are coaches for executive functioning support. If you have access to any of that, either through your school or in your community, those are great resources to check out. There's just so much that.
So we were at the pool this summer and something happened, because the man at the gate, I always call him the man at the gate that says, don't say that. But with ADHDers comes out, and
you can say that. Yeah.
And they can't keep it in. Like they feel like they're busting to the seams,
Yeah.
And of course it came out, and it wasn't the most appropriate. But, because he's getting the support early on, he says, you know what, I'm sorry. I have different wiring of my brain, and sometimes I do that.
Yeah.
And
Which
I was
like, yeah.
no, what would happen to us 20 years ago? My mother would pull me out of the pool. I would be punished. And like that cycle of shame.
Cycle. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I was talking, I run a podcast if you're listening, and one of my guests recently was talking about how one of the most important things we can be teaching our neurodivergent children and youth is self-advocacy.
Yeah.
And I think that was such a great point, because that was definitely something I was missing when I was a child, is just being able to, I was like out of touch with my feelings. I wasn't supported particularly well at school. And like, I couldn't say, I didn't even know what was bothering me. So I definitely couldn't say, hey, that light is making me crazy. Turn it off, please. Because I didn't even know what was making me crazy. So if you get that early intervention, you're going to help your child identify what's potentially triggering or difficult for them, and then be able to say, hey, could I have more time on this test? It's really like very loud in here. Or, hey, can I possibly have a break for like 10 minutes, or go get some water or whatever, or go to the bathroom to move? And that would have changed my life, like, hugely. And that's just like little things, right? Like just being able to go get some water a couple of times a day or whatever. Like that's not a big change to the school environment or whatever, but it's teaching a kid how to ask for what they want. And that is like highly recommend highly recommend if you have working on that in your daily life at home. It really can make such a huge difference for them. So in their confidence.
So when it comes to managing the relationship that people think so differently, what are some of the pearls of wisdom that you have acquired? Because obviously you're in a neurodivergent marriage, and you've told us that you have neurodivergent children. What are some of the wisdom? Like, what can we do on a daily basis? Because simple conversations also can be really frustrating.
Sometimes they can, yeah. So a couple of things come to mind. I already said, like, learn about your partner's neurotype if you can, both by talking to them and by doing some kind of outside research. And you don't have to like be able to write a PhD dissertation on it. Just like know something, right? The other thing is, especially if you're like me and maybe you, late diagnosed, late identified, learn more about yourself. Because a lot of us, like the are late identified, who are like, oh, ADHD, that makes sense. And they go to the doctor, they get the diagnosis, and then they don't learn anything else about ADHD. And a lot of times what happens is that some of the problems you're having with communication, or with some of that emotional regulation stuff that's very common in neurodivergent people, you don't know that you're doing it. So how could your partner possibly figure out what you mean if you don't even know what you mean? So doing the work and really trying to understand, doing some mindfulness, go to therapy if you need to go to therapy, read if you need to read, watch YouTube blogs on autism or ADHD or whatever it is, but get to know yourself and what your traits are, where you get stuck, where your anxiety points are, what makes you flip out. Like, there's a trigger for that, right? And understanding what those are, you can get in front of them a lot better, and you can communicate to your partner, hey, I get really weirded out when I'm, physically stuck in a corner. And this used to happen to me when my kids were young. When we had just two people living in this house, I was fine. I had no space issues. I didn't mind. I wasn't easily startled. Nothing happened. The minute we had toddlers everywhere, I suddenly I felt like I was trapped in corners all the time. And if my partner came and tried to talk to me while I was in the corner, he doesn't know. He's not trying to be aggressive. He's just trying to talk to me. But I was like, oh God, I'm stuck in the corner. And I had this huge spike of negative reaction. And so eventually I figured it out. I said, you know what? Can we just not have conversations when I'm standing in the kitchen anymore? Can you catch me and we'll go to the couch, or we'll physically move to a different location because I can't, it's making me freaked out. And just that tweak really changed our conversation of saying, don't try to catch me when I'm doing something. Let's make this for it. And that's just a small example of, if you know yourself better and you know why you're kind of having a big reaction, you can get in front of it and communicate to your partner what's happening. I also needed to talk we talked together about how sometimes I need to take a 10-minute break before I can have a conversation if I get overwhelmed, because I can't talk when I'm overwhelmed. And then he would think that I was just being shut down and reluctant and sort of like, the word, like surly, like, like the teenage girl who's just like, I'm not going to talk to you.
Right.
So I was actually in meltdown, like I physically couldn't talk. And that's not his fault for not knowing that, right? Because he's not an autistic person. So being able to recognize, oh, I need this 10 minutes, and then I need to communicate that to him, right? Can work wonders. And same thing for him. And I don't want to share any of his personal stuff, but like if he had something going on, him doing the work and figuring out what was getting him and then communicating that once he was there was a lot better than me just like trying to imagine what might be happening in his brain, right? Because like I don't know what's happening. Like he has a different brain than me. So
right. Just the awareness.
And learn about you. Yeah.
Just the awareness is huge, I think. And you're right. A lot of people get the diagnosis and they go to what the stereotypical ADHD looks like, or the stereotypical autistic person looks like or acts. And really, I've come to learn, wow, I had no idea. It really is this whole umbrella of symptoms.
Yes. So you might be familiar with top 5 traits of autistic people, right? But there are like easily 200 traits of autism. And not each autistic will hit all those traits, right? But if you don't even know they exist, how are you supposed to recognize them in yourself? And same for any other neurotype, right? So it is really important to do your own work. And also, I don't know if Nick is still watching, but that's also for kids too. I know we're talking about relationships, but that knowing yourself and because kids will trigger you even when they're not trying. So again, doing on yourself and figuring out, well, what's getting me, and then communicating with them about, hey, I don't like it when you play in the kitchen when I'm trying to make dinner. It freaks me out. Let's not do that anymore. We're going to make a house rule, right? You can do that very gently and very like kindly, but you're also setting a boundary that's going to kind of make you a better parent, right? So it's the same thing with a partnership relationship where you need to know yourself to know what boundaries you need in order to have a better communicative relationship.
I think just the awareness is huge, because when you're aware, you can step back, even if you can step back for a couple of seconds. But when you don't have an awareness that something is different, or someone's intention is they're not trying to annoy you, or they're not trying to be oppositional or defensive, because it's easy, I think, in a relationship or a family dynamic to trigger each other when you're neurodivergent.
Patterns, and you really need that curiosity and that honesty to break that pattern of just going in circles around each other.
I usually start by saying, I know it's not your intention, to piss me off. I shouldn't say it so bluntly, but sometimes I
no, that's okay. We're different people.
I know it's not your intention to piss me off, but
how it works for you, though. That's really important, right? Like, I might give you a script, and that might work for some people, but some people will want to say something like what you just said, and it just depends on your family. And both of those, but the intention is important, right? That kind of being willing to hear, assuming the best of your partner, that they are doing their best, right? Just like you would for a child, they are doing their best. And then coming at it from, well, you're doing your best and I'm doing your best, but we're still having this communication gap. So what is that gap, right? And just brainstorming together and really having that curious mindset of what could we do differently? How could we talk to each other differently? Do we need more breaks? Do we need to like schedule, like my partner and I now do a like check-in every evening, because sometimes we miss each other during the day. We're all doing, the kids are up, whatever. So after bedtime, we like schedule like a half an hour, 45-minute check-in. Sometimes we don't use any of it. Sometimes we're just like, do you have anything? No, I don't have anything, whatever. Sometimes we use the whole 45 minutes. And that came out of realizing that we were just constantly not on the same page, because we were trying other ways of doing it. But you can't solve that kind of thing until you can identify it. And you can't do that until you approach it with open curiosity and a real purity of intention, saying, you're doing your best. How can I help us fix this, right? How can we both help us fix this?
Yeah. I always try to start with like the positive. you know, I know your intention and I know you love me. But, you know,
Yeah.
but at least they know that they're not being attacked, right? The conversation's not starting where they need to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm taking ownership about, of how I feel.
That's really important. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. And because this way it allows them to be vulnerable and to understand you, you know, instead of trying to like defend themselves, you know, because I think all of us that have not been identified, and even those that have been identified, okay, you know, we went to school and, you know, we were forced to be in an environment that I don't even think is conducive to neurotypical kids.
I agree with you.
To be honest, right?
Yeah.
But it was even harder on us. And, you know, there's some trauma there. There's some trauma when someone brings attention to a behavior or if you're acting a certain way and, okay, what am I doing wrong? Or it's hard not to take that personally for it not to affect your self-esteem. I mean, I had to do a lot of work on my self-esteem after I got out of school. And, you know, with that knowledge, I said, you know, I don't want my kids to have to be faced with certain hardships that interfere with their learning, you know, because there's a lot of tools in schools now for kids that are neurodivergent, and they don't have to be looked upon as, you know, oh, what is he doing? He looks weird. Or why is he bouncing up and down in his chair? And no, there's chairs now that are like balls. And they're meant to be bounced up and down, right?
Yeah. That wiggle seat I was talking about earlier. And that's another reason I think being really open with your kids about like what their brain is like. Like I get emails from parents a lot that are like, should I tell my autistic kid they're autistic? And it's like, yes, you should, because they know that something's different, and whether they're whatever neurotype there is, they know. Like it was like in retrospect, I wasn't identified till I was much older, like I just said, but I had such a hard time in school, and I had such a hard time in so many different situations. And I feel like if I'd had the label, I know parents don't want to give their kids labels, but they're going to get other labels. If you don't give them autistic or ADHD, they're going to get like lazy or busy or crazy or like
that are really negative.
They're really negative and really full of that shame again. So if you just say there's nothing wrong with being autistic, right? So give them that and help them learn about what it means. And that way, again, they can get to that self-advocacy of saying, you know, my brain is different than yours, and sometimes I need this, but I'm still like an awesome person, you know? Sometimes I need to wiggle, or sometimes I need to like do vocal stims or whatever, or I do this with my hands, but I'm still awesome, you know? And that self-advocacy is important. So,
you know, I think one of the other blessings that I have with my brain, which I now embrace as like my superpower, is that I can look at all sorts of angles in a situation. And I was talking to my friend who tends to be more on, he's on the autism spectrum side. And he's like, he just looks at one way. Like, he's
it's
not
so
looking
fun,
at
different.
Yeah. And I'm like, so I'm faced with like, do I need to buy a car? And then I'm like, well, if I buy a car, you know, A, B, and C, and D, and then if we do A and B, this is what happens. So I'm creating like this outline in my brain. Yeah. And to come to a conclusion and decision, that's the best possible outcome. And he's like, you know, I would just get the car.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, like, why is this so complicated? And but it's just the way my brain works. And I have been able, and this really is for you, Nick, that, you know, with your son, embrace his different way of thinking. Because I have been able to do some wonderful things and research some amazing things in my nursing career because of the way that I think and my view that I bring to the table. You know, really thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
You know, so
almost
I think
hyperconnectivity trait is really common in ADHD folks, and it's wonderful. That ability to bridge these two totally disparate things and make them somehow fit together. It's such a talent. Yeah.
right. So I think that's another tip that I have found in relationships, that your neurotype is different, is to really appreciate the talents and strengths of the individual and what they bring to the table. You know, where my mate really is exhausted in any function and any kind of social communication with anybody,
Yeah.
you know, I bring the opposite, where that allows our family to have a sense of community, right? Because somebody has to do that work.
Yeah. And it is
So,
work.
yeah, it's work, right?
It's
For some
work.
people, it's
Yeah.
real work. So I think really celebrating the strengths of your partner, you know, but not focusing on the weaknesses, because those can be every day. Like it's annoying every single day where, oh, you forgot the keys, or you didn't put away the toothbrush, or those things can build up to annoy people. So I tend just to really focus on the strengths, and it kind of minimizes the daily frustration of the weaknesses.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I agree. I think you should always be focusing on strengths. And the other thing I would say is just that if somebody has what you would consider like a broad array of weaknesses, like you just mentioned, they forget their keys and some of that is your mindset, and some of that is like, well, is everything being put away perfectly in my house more important than my partner's well-being, right? So it's some of that, like really thinking about what's important to you and letting something. But also, if like something's really important, like your partner keeps losing the keys and you need those keys, that and this works better with also with kids. So I'm not saying like you're going to approach it exactly the same with your partner as you do with your children, but that working on one weakness at a time. I see a lot of people have this idea that like even with partnerships, like you're going to fix him, right? You're going to go and you're going to fix all these things. And this is especially a female to male thing, but it happens the other way too. And among any kind of relationship with any kind of partners. And also with parents and children, a lot of times they'll be like, oh, he has this problem and this problem and this problem. We better do all these things at once. And that is really, can be really demoralizing to the person, because then they're not being recognized what they can bring. And they bring amazing things. So if you have to fix something, it's really important, and you've done all your work and you've really thought about your values and what's the most important to you, and you still need to fix this thing, pick one thing and just work on the keys. And then once you've got the keys settled, give them some time before you work on something else, because they are doing their best. And this works, like this is me too. Like my partner has asked me to improve in some cases, right? It's much easier for us to focus on just working on this one aspect and making progress steadily. And then once we hit that milestone, it's like, okay, now I can work on the next thing. But if you change things about us at once or 8 things about your kid at once, no one's going to win. Like everybody will be upset. So please don't do that. Just like if you need to improve, just agree together to do the one thing, right? And if your partner doesn't fix that thing, you move on. You don't harp on it. You figure something else out.
You're right, because that's a great point, actually, Danielle, about being demoralized. And then what happens is that person has to do like compensate for their behavior, and they start lying, they start manipulating. Yeah. And I always say, you know that movie with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson where he says, you can't handle the truth? I've said that more than one time. You can't handle the truth, you know, because you're afraid. And, you know, as a kid, you start lying.
Yeah, because you're still doing your best. You want approval from your parent, right? And you've given a situation that you can't possibly win. So what else are you supposed to, like from a child's perspective, how else are you supposed to handle that, you know? So,
and even as adults, like, okay, so when you start having family and children, and you made the point that, you know, when it was just the two of you, it was manageable. But when you start adding, you know, more and more stress, we need more and more tools. Because we start getting like, exactly, Nick, we need a few good men. we start compromising. And I always joke around that Jesus had 12 disciples. So, if Jesus Christ needed 12 disciples, who am I to think that I can do all of this by myself?
Yeah.
And no matter how organized, so I've had to reach out for help. I've had to reach out to loved ones. I've had to hire people at times. Sometimes it's going to be pizza night because we just cannot get that meal made or go to the store today.
Like, it happens. It's fine. Yeah. Nobody works in a vacuum, right? We're all in a community, and we're built to get support from other people. So take advantage of it. Have it. Yeah.
Right. That's a really good point, not to be like browbeating. I call it browbeating.
Yeah. Nobody can do everything. That is a lie. There's no such thing. Like, CEOs hire everybody, right, to help them run their company. Like, even, I don't know, like, just as a normal, I'm a mom, I run my business, I have lots going on. My kids are homeschooled, but they go to co-op once a week. We have their grandmas with them right now, so I can do this live, right? Like, we have people to help us occasionally. The pizza came today. So this is a day where maybe I'm not performing as a mother particularly well, if you want to be judgy about it. But I decided, well, I'm going to focus on this today because this is important, and working with my clients today because this is important. So you're allowed to have different goals on different days, right? It can all play into your kind of future mega goals. Like, you don't have to be a perfect everything all the time. You could be a mom today and be a business person tomorrow and do whatever. Like, it'll work.
And for me, I need that to be a good mom.
Oh, yeah.
I need
make it.
Yeah.
I didn't make it long at all. I really try. I wanted to be the stay-at-home mom because honestly, childcare in Colorado is so expensive. I could not make enough money to like make it worth putting my kids in childcare. And I really wanted to do, and I think I made it like 8 months stay at home before I took a remote job because I just could not. I needed to use my brain. So you have to do, and like we talked about, I know we've talked about this before, if you are not taking care of yourself, you are not going to be a good parent, right? Sometimes taking care of yourself means not actually spending so much time with your kids because you need to use your brain, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a better mother for it. So
that's a part of my tools. A part of my tools is to go on Instagram 3 days a week and talk to people that I really enjoy talking with. And, part of my tools is building this company, Cuida, because it's such a passion of mine. And, but I want you to tell everybody about your podcast because your podcast is amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. So I'm, if you're like new or just joined, I'm Danielle Sullivan, and I'm a certified life coach. I'm a neurodiversity advocate. I'm autistic, and I work with ADHD autistic people, and I have a podcast called the Neurodiverging Podcast. So it's the same as my username. It's just that plus podcast. And you can find it streaming anywhere. And we do a lot of things. We really focus on neurodiversity, ADHD and autism especially. We interview experts. We kind of do some deep dives into the research in various areas, and we really try to focus on neurodiversity as a positive piece of being a person, as a positive part of being human. And there is sort of a parenting, some episodes are more parenting, I guess, themed than others. But for example, this whole fall, we've been working on education and neurodiversity. So we've had a whole bunch of episodes in the past 2 months about, schooling, about tutoring, about like how neurodivergent children learn and how to support them learning, because it's such a wide area and it's of particular interest for me. So that's kind of what we've been focusing on. And then we're going to kind of have another section oncoming about ADHD and inattentive ADHD in adults and all the ways ADHD can kind of show up for people. So that's like our next, couple of months coming up. So we kind of cover a lot of areas, but if you're a parent or if you're just interested in neurodiversity, come check us out. It's really fun. I've learned so much from these guests and just from doing the podcast. And like you with Cuida, it was it's something I just sort of woke up one day and I was like, it was the ADHD like kicking in because I am definitely more traditionally autistic than ADHD, but I have the ADHD too. And I just was like, there's not enough resources for families of mixed neurotypes. If you have some autistic people, some ADHD people, some neurotypical people, there's nothing really out there that's geared for us. And I really wanted to start pulling together resources for the families like mine. So, yeah, Neurodiverging Podcast. Check us out.
You have some great speakers on there, and it's such a valuable information.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the work that you do. I've learned so much from you, actually. You've helped me, and our whole purpose of doing these lives is to help people, give them resources, because it's nothing like learning from each other, right?
I completely agree. Yeah.
It's
collaboration is so important.
It is. So, and I always have fun talking with you, and we get a good chuckle out of, because it's so relatable. It's so, when you meet somebody that's similar to yourself, it's like a kindled spirit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. It's been wonderful to come on, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope folks found it helpful. Yeah, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay then, Danielle, well, I'm going to let you go, and a part of my self-care is I walk in the evenings, and that kind of helps reground myself. So,
well, I hope you have a wonderful walk.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great night, Danielle.
Bye.